Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Abu Dhabi Festival. Welcome to Riwaq Al Fikr. Today's debate will discuss culture and identity. The session is held in association with New York University, Abu Dhabi, and will be conducted in English and Arabic. Simultaneous translation is available on channel 1 of your headphones. You'll be invited to direct questions to the panel at the end of the discussion, and please note that this event is being filmed.
أصحاب السعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السيدات والسادة، أهلاً بكم في رواق الفكر. إن للفنون تعريفات لا حصر لها، تلتقي جميعاً عند أهميتها في حياة الناس، فالثقافة مصدر كل إبداع والفن مصدر كل جمال. ومن هذا المنطلق تأتي الندوة الحوارية ندوة الثقافة والهوية بالتعاون مع جامعة نيويورك أبو ظبي لتسليط الضوء على آليات تعزيز الهوية وإبرازها عبر تحفيز التعبير الإبداعي وحوار الثقافات. تتوفر الترجمة الفورية على القناة رقم 1. يرجى توجيه الأسئلة للمتحدثين عند نهاية الندوة، كما يرجى العلم بأننا نقوم بتسجيل فيديو لكامل الندوة.
So without further ado, please welcome our distinguished panel of speakers. From my far right, filmmaker and, Director of the Poetry Academy, Abu Dhabi, Sultan Al-Amimi. Director of Research and Knowledge Services at the National Centre for Documentation and Research, Ministry of Presidential Affairs, Abu Dhabi, Dr. Aisha Bilkhair. And as our moderator this evening, we're welcoming filmmaker Salem Brahimi. Joining him is filmmaker and scriptwriter Manish Pandey. And we welcome His Excellency Jose Eugenio Salarich, Ambassador of Spain to the UAE. Our rapporteur this session is the businessman, artist and gallerist Mohamed Abdul Latif Kanoo. We'd like to point out that the country of honour of the Abu Dhabi Festival 2013 is, of course, the Kingdom of Spain.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I'd just like to introduce I was going to say the boundaries of this subject, but it's a subject that has no boundaries, culture and identity. And I'd like to start with what happened this morning. We were graced with a very, very interesting talk by Sir Clive Giddinson, who runs the Carnegie Hall in New York. And it was spot on with the subject we're going to be exploring. Sir Clive talked about Carnegie Hall and about one of its mandates, which is to help people explore, basically push the boundaries of who they are, find resources within themselves that they didn't even suspect, which is basically redefining your identity and pushing its boundaries, thanks to music. And that was just probably the most, I don't want to paraphrase him because I won't be as good as he was, but it was one of the most interesting and vital and inspiring examples of the subject we're going to be exploring today. So I'd like to thank Sir Clive for being here and thank him for this talk this morning. Now, identity, of course, is a fascinating, but it's also a very volatile subject in the sense that it's one thing and it's the other. Identity is both real and it's imagined. It's both collective and personal. It can be seen as very monolithical in the sense that it can be seen as the rock-bottom foundation of who we are as a collective construct, or it can be seen as the exact opposite, which is a very fluid and dynamic reality of strains just in constant dialogue with each other and changing as life changes and as we change. Edward Said, to remain in the vocabulary of music, the great Palestinian thinker, Edward Said would talk about counterpoint, parallel streams of music in constant dialogue, and he defined identity as such. School teaches us, works on our identity, and all schools in the world teach that we have a valid history, a beautiful language. Sometimes they even tell us that it's the best. And of course, it's part of building an identity. But I'll go back to Edward Said. Edward Said would always say, okay, that's great. Now you have to make the narrative more complicated. And he would say that his job as an educator was actually to help people unlearn a lot of what they had learned and sort of question it. That's where culture comes in. And that's one of the fascinating parts of culture and identity is that artists help us challenge ourselves, challenge our own perceptions of ourselves, our perceptions of others. And that makes culture a very, very powerful engine for identity. Now I just want to bring this subject closer to home and closer to the Arab world, because we're in a sadly in a very good position to know that the engine of culture can also make the narrative more simplistic. It can debase our identity, it can denigrate who we are, and when you look at Hollywood's portrayal of the Arab, it started with Rudolph Valentino, and it hasn't changed since then. It shows also how culture can actually be a powerful tool to actually make the narrative more simple and dangerously simple. So I'd just like to end on perhaps a darker side. Amin Ma'louf, great writer, wrote a book. The title in English is quite surprising. It's called In the Name of Identity, Violence and the Need to Belong, which is a valid translation. However, the original title in French, I think, is more interesting. The title in French is Identité meurtrière, which would loosely translate into deadly identities or murderous identities. And it's an interesting essay in the sense that with culture and identity, we have a powerful tool to actually explore ourselves and others and actually achieve universality, explore how particular we are. And weirdly, that's the magic of culture. While we assert ourselves as being different, we actually connect to other people that are different, and that's universality. I don't know how it works. That's the magic of culture, I guess, in the arts. But that's how it is. However, you can achieve the opposite, and to a physically deadly result. And unfortunately, the Arab world, since colonization and then since more recent events, has been experiencing that, and I very much hope that we'll be moving out of that in the years to come. I will not introduce our panelists in the sense that they have already been introduced, but of course they must feel free to introduce themselves or present any part of their work that they find relevant. So I'll be very, very classic and ladies first and start with Dr. Aisha Bilkhair. And yeah. Now, I'll just start with a very, very broad question. Dr. Aisha Bilkhair is part of the UNESCO Intangible Heritage Preservation Committee. Now, in Intangible Heritage, you have oral tradition, and one of the things she has been working on, I find it very poetic, in addition of being very useful, is preserving the lullabies, the traditional lullabies of the UAE that mothers would sing, and I hope still sing to their children. We're touching one of the elements of identity and of how we preserve identity and elements of culture, and how do we actually preserve that and make this foundation, put it in dialogue with today and today's identity.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today, and I'd like to thank the festival organizers for inviting me. This is such an honor. Of course, in the UAE, when a child is born, of course the identity is not known gender-wise, but the preparation for that child will start by the androgynous dress that is prepared for him or her arrival. And it's called the Kandora al-Ma'afaya. It doesn't have just a plain Kandora or dishdasha. With that, of course, comes the very first rearing of that child, where lullabies are sang, and that child from infancy until age 3 is cared for with cuddling and constant hugging, and so his identity, the first identity the child will know is that he or she are blessed. and he or she are of this religion, Islam. Then on the 7th day, a name will be given from the day of birth until the 7th day. Some people name them ahead of time, and sometimes for good luck or bad luck, they would wait, and then a name will be given. So this person is nurtured from day one. These lullabies are sang for them so to get them used to the tone that we speak and to the dialect in which we speak. A child then from age 0 until age 3 are taught simple language, and that language consists of them communicating with their parents at all times. Language as simple as, if they want water, the water is called mbu. If they want to eat, food is nam-nam. If they want to sleep, sleep is hawa. If they have pain, they need to locate pain, they say wawa or uff. So the mother is in constant contact with that child, and she knows, and the child is communicating with her also to know that they're aware of themselves, they're aware of their environment. After age 3, then 3 to 6, they are taught a language that they tell them stories where they can vision and see their surroundings. They teach them about the camel is a'a, and then the dog is dahdo. Then they teach them about other things beyond now the mother. It's in their environment. So they identify themselves in contrast to their environment. And then on the 3rd stage, from 6 to 9, then they are fully grown. Then that language, the simple language of nam-nam and mbu and all of that, dissolves like sugar in water. And they automatically acquire a language of adults, because by that age, 9 and 10, and they can communicate as adults, and they are treated as such. And those days, when I grew up in this environment, we all assimilated into one value. If I go running to my mother, crying that so-and-so have twisted my ear, she'll say, yeah, you must have done something wrong. Otherwise, you would not get mistreated by our neighbor. And these are the identity elements or components that really resonate in us, and without being isolated from the world around us. That's why when slowly the demographic changes happened, identity became an obsession. People wanted to know who you are, so they treat you according to the box they put you in. Because then I need to know, are you of this origin? Are you of that origin? Are you of that? And these are the differentiation that came later on when demographics have changed. And I think I'll allow others to talk about that, and I'll interject later on about that, because I have a lot to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll stay in the field of language and oral tradition, and also written tradition, with Dr. Amimi. Obviously, we're in a place in the country which is very, very interesting in the sense that, well, for our subject, because we have a very strong and rooted culture, but we also have a place that is very much plugged into the future. So we have an interesting tension, and we'll talk about this with also Dr. Bilkhair a bit later. But so we have the Arabic language, which is a language is an important component of identity. Are there threats? Do you feel that there are threats or dangers, or on the opposite, opportunities for the Arab language to evolve in that context? And does it come from outside or from within our societies?
Okay. Yeah. I will speak in Arabic. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الموضوع الهوية في الثقافة وعلاقتها بالمجتمع والبيئة التي نعيش فيها موضوع يعني ذو شجون وطويل وذو تفرعات كثيرة، ولكن لا شك في أن اللغة تمثل جزء بارز ومهم من الهوية، بل إنها تأتي في الصف الأمامي من الهوية التي يبدأ بها الشخص تعريف نفسه بها بالآخر. من الممكن أن يكون تكون الملابس جزء تعريفي بصري بالهوية، ولكن اللغة هي الجزء السمعي في التعريف بالهوية والجزء اللساني في التعريف بالهوية. أعمل حاليا على معجم للهجة الإماراتية، وهو معجم كبير. أحاول قدر الإمكان أن أستقصي فيه وأجمع مفردات اللهجة الإماراتية وظواهرها وتاريخ هذه المفردات وأصولها. وخرجت حتى الآن من خلال جمعي لعدد كبير من المفردات على مدى 8 سنوات من البحث، خرجت بنتائج لم أكن أعرفها ولم أعتقد أنها تشكل فعلا هذا الجزء من هويتي. من أهم هذه النتائج أن لهجتي الإماراتية تمثل لي خصوصية أتفرد بها وتعطيني كياني الخاص بي بصورة مستقلة عن غيري، وفي نفس الوقت تشتبك مع غيري من اللهجات العربية وتشترك في نفس الوقت مع اللغة العربية الفصحى. أفتخر بأني لا أزال أتحدث بلهجة إماراتية ذات خصوصية في هويتها، في مفرداتها، في نطق الأحرف، في تقلباتها. لماذا أفتخر؟ أفتخر لأنها ذات جذور عميقة تعود إلى لغة عربية فصيحة تاريخها يعود إلى أكثر من 1500 سنة. عندما أجد والدي الرجل الأمي الذي لا يقرأ ولا يكتب، كبير في السن، ويتحدث بمفردات ذكرت في قصائد عربية قديمة يعود تاريخها 1500 سنة، أو مفردات فصيحة ولكن لم يعد يتحدث بها إلا أبناء المنطقة عندنا مثلا في الإمارات أو كبار السن، فأنا أشعر بالفخر لأن لي جذور عميقة ترتبط بهذه الأرض وترتبط بهذه اللغة. أكثر من 1500 سنة مرت عليها أجيال كثيرة. في نفس الوقت أجد أن مفردات من اللهجة الإماراتية، بعض المفردات وجدت أنه يتحدث بها أو مستخدمة في بادية الجزائر مثلا، أو بادية مصر، أو بادية سوريا، أو في دولة من الدول العربية. هذه المفردة مستخدمة عندهم، أحيانا قد أجدها في بيئتين وأحيانا في بيئة أخرى غير البيئة الإماراتية. فأنا وجدت أن هناك جوانب تربطني من حيث اللغة واللهجة، تربطني بمناطق أخرى وهويات أخرى تختلف عني نسبيا، لكن تجمعنا فيما بعد بيننا يعني جوانب مشتركة توحدنا، من المفروض أن توحدنا أكثر مما هي تفرقنا. من هذا المنطلق أعتقد أن نحن يجب أن ننظر إلى الهوية الثقافية من جانب موحد بيننا وبين العرب، وبيننا وبين غير العرب أيضا. لغتي العربية أيضا ولهجتي المحلية لم تخلو من التأثر بمفردات ولغات أجنبية أخرى. من المعروف أنه لا توجد لغة نقية في هذا العالم لم تتأثر بلغات أخرى. اللغة العربية تأثرت، وهذا التأثر قديم أيضا. العرب لجأوا منذ القدم إلى تعريب مفردات وردت وجاءتهم من حضارات أخرى ومن بيئات أخرى، من هويات أخرى، وكان لابد من التعامل والقبول لمثل هذه المفردات، خاصة في ظل عدم وجود نظير لها في المجتمع والبيئة، إذا كان هناك شيء غير موجود في البيئة وتم استيراده من الخارج، من الطبيعي أنه لن توجد كلمة نظيرة لها دائما، وبالتالي يجب أن يكون هناك نوع من التأقلم والتكيف والقبول مع هذه المفردات وبالتالي تعريبها. أنا أفتخر أن لغتي تعرب مفردات أخرى، وأفتخر أن هناك مفردات من اللغة العربية توجد في اللهجات واللغات الأخرى، ولذلك يجب أن ننظر إلى هذه الجوانب إلى أنها جوانب تجمعنا، تقرب بيننا أكثر مما هي تفرقنا. هناك مخاطر على الهوية، لكن المخاطر على الهوية فيما يتعلق بالثقافة واللغة العربية ليس بالضرورة أن تكون مخاطر خارجية. أتوقع أو أعتقد أن هناك مخاطر داخلية أيضا، مخاطر تأتي من الداخل، التخلي عن هذه الثقافة. أنا أعتقد متى ما استطاع ابن البيئة أن يفهم ويعي ويلم بتاريخ هويته، أعتقد أنه سيتمسك بها أكثر من أي شيء آخر. نحن في حاجة إلى البحث عن أصول هذه الثقافة التي نحن نعيشها ونمارسها. بالنسبة لي لا أرى أن اللغة العربية الآن تعيش في خطر محدق بها. اللغة العربية لغة قوية، تاريخها يعود إلى أكثر من 1500 سنة، استطاعت الصمود طوال هذه الفترة، بل استطاعت أن تؤثر في اللغات الأخرى. أرى في نفس الوقت أن اللهجات المحلية لا تؤثر في اللغة العربية، أرى أنها تكمل بعضها البعض. اللغة العربية في الأساس فيما جمع من كتب ومراجع القواميس العربية هي خليط من مفردات تتعلق باللهجات وليس للغة واحدة، لهجات قبائل، لهجات أماكن عاش فيها العرب، وبالتالي فهذه كلها تشكل في نتاجها هوية عربية فصيحة وفي نفس الوقت محلية. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much. شكرا. I'm going to turn to Manish, and I'm a bit biased because we come from the same world, which is film. So now, Manish, in addition to being an artist and so quite valid in our subject today, he's the embodiment of our subject, because Whitman once said, "I contain multitudes," and he raises the bar. I mean, there are elements of India where he was born. He lives in England. His journey started with orthopedic surgery, I think, and ends up in film. So a man of many worlds and many identities. And interestingly enough, and that's going to be my starting question, some of your work, a lot of your work is biographical in the sense that you did a film about Senna, which is the life of the great race driver, and you're currently working on another project about Ferrari. So this is biographical work. So how do you actually fit in pieces of yourself? How does this relate to you, your own identity?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's fantastic to be here. I think when you look at film as a medium, there's a lot of cynicism because it's a very expensive artistic medium. You don't often have millions and millions of dollars at your disposal as a canvas artist. But I think to make films work, whether they're sort of Hollywood blockbusters or whether they're really small French pieces where basically two people are talking to each other across a table for 2 hours, what you have to do is connect with the humanity of your audience. That's the bottom line. And I think that's just the bottom line with all art. The other element, I think, to art, and certainly very important in film, is conflict. There just always has to be conflict. You have to feel that edge. And when you're a child, you want a nice, easy resolution of conflict. And as we grow up, we realize life is not like that. And sometimes we can appreciate films as art that don't resolve things. And I am particularly attracted to biography because I think filmmakers, I think any artist really explores themselves through what they do. It's the engine that makes you wake up in the morning, in my case, stare at a blank computer screen, and maybe after 8 hours come up with 2 sensible sentences. And I think you're right. I moved to England when I was 4, and I had a very strongly Indian culture. I was actually quite precocious. I could read and write just at about 2 years old. So I had a very definite sense of who it was to be Indian. And my father, who was a surgeon, moved to England, and it was a great brain drain from India of the late 60s. And I found myself, rather than being surrounded by this big, warm Indian family, in actually quite a reserved, and if I'm really honest, in the early 70s in England, quite a racist culture. There was still this whole post-colonial, you're Indian, so you can't be as good. And if you looked at examples on television, I mean, there were just two things I remember from my upbringing, which they make me cringe now, but they make most English people cringe. There was a show called Love Thy Neighbor. It's a black man with a black woman living next door to a white man with a white woman, and the jokes were thick and racist. Very often there would be some irony in it, and the joke would be on the white couple, but very often there were things that were said that were so harsh and so probably not meant, but that would impact you culturally. And I remember the second show was a show about the English army set in Burma called It Ain't Half Hot Mum. And the main character in that got the jokes was actually a browned up white man who wore the turban and just cracked all those really pretty obvious standard Indian jokes. But I think over the last 20 years, as we've seen an assimilation, a cultural assimilation, you can see that these roles are reflected in film. I mean, certainly in television. It's not got to the point where James Bond could come from Bombay. Okay, it's not there. But I think what we are seeing is a little bit more open-mindedness in the way that the films are made and the way people will think about character. And that reflects on what I would call a very obvious shared journey over the last 30 years. I mean, my father arrived in England in 1968, but my journey from 1972, when I arrived in England, it's about 90% the journey of my best friend, who happens to be a 6'3" rugby playing Englishman. And I think that that impacts enormously on the work that we do. And Senna, for me, as a film, if you think about it, it's about a brown Brazilian who comes to Europe, and he has the arrogance to think that he isn't as good as any of the drivers around him, but he's actually better. And his whole journey isn't to come second or third or fifth, as he says famously in the film. It's to win. And he's quite happy to risk his life to do that every 2 weeks. And he's quite happy with the establishment saying to him, you're not good enough, you're an outsider, we're doing this to you, we're doing that to you. And what does he do? He just picks himself up and he just goes back in again. And all of this is great and it's fascinating and makes a good plot, but for me that's not enough. I think what really cements the film is a spiritualism. The fact is that Senna sucked people in because of his charisma, and that charisma, I think, was based on his basic humanity. You could see that this man wasn't really doing it to buy a private jet. He wasn't doing it to buy the big island in Brazil. He had all of those. His whole life was about beating himself. You know, I just end on one simple point, and, you know, I hope it reflects on me, and I hope it reflects on artists in general. There's a part in the middle of the film which a lot of people find distressing. Senna sees a terrible accident. There's a driver who's been ripped out of his car, and he's lying mangled in the middle of the track. Senna sees this on a monitor, and he reflects on it. And what he decides to do is, instead of going into the motorhome, he walks out onto the track, and he looks at the mangled driver, and he looks at the doctor trying to repair the mangled driver, and he asks himself a really simple question. Do I fear this? Do I fear this, and can I get over that fear? Because if I can't get over that fear, I'm never going to be able to explore the edge of what I do again. So I've got to make a decision right now. Do I give up my life, my motor racing, or do I go and do it even better? And he goes out and he sets an amazing lap time. But the real twist of the story is he was already on pole position in that moment. At any objective level, what he did in the car after seeing the accident was irrelevant. His position on the track was secure, but what he had to do was go out there and beat himself. And I think that has a great resonance for culture, for identity, because, you know, what are human beings put on earth for, in a way? I mean, what's the point? It's the point of making movies, it's the point of building roads or bridges. I mean, it's about exploring ourselves. It's about exploring ourselves repeatedly. And I think if it resonates with people outside, then I think it's done in a proper way, in a formal way.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Ambassador Salarich, thank you for being with us. I'd like to start again. I'd like to keep things close to home. I don't want to be too ethnocentric, but I will. Obviously, Spain has a very, very special place in the heart and minds and imagination of Arabs and Muslims because of Andalus and Cordoba. And the question I have is that, you know, we have this shared heritage, but how much of it still is an active, living part of Spanish identity and culture today? Is it just something of the past, or is it actually living in the minds and mindset of Spain today?
Thank you. Thank you, and first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and to this discussion. Thank you very much to Mrs. Kanoo for making something very special for my country, which is Spain being such an honored position in the Abu Dhabi Festival. And I feel very grateful to you all for being here. Well, that's a question, that's a good question for a scientific, bad question for a diplomat. Because if I have to answer from the bottom of my heart, I have to say that, that of course, without having in mind the diplomacy or science, of course we feel very much close to the Arab world, because in fact we are Arab. It is something which is very much in our subconscious. It's something very much in our minds. If I have to put it in percentage, I'm doubting if to say we have a 30% of Arab culture or we have a 50%, and I can explain it. 30% of the Spanish language comes from Arab origin, and this is a fact. Almost all words starting by AL, and there are lots of pages in Spain starting by AL, they are Spanish, or even the name of towns, the name of rivers. Madrid is Madrid, all rivers, important rivers in Spain, starts by Wad, which is, of course, a river. We have the names of cities reflecting, like Medina, which is another name, but normal names, common names, even our own names are Spanish. So 30% I will say. But being more diplomat, I would say that 50% is our percentage. And I would say 50% because without being politically incorrect, we lived 800 years under, we say in Spain, Arab domination. In fact, it was an Arab colonization, but it was a period of history of 800 years, which is a lot. And 800 years that go from 700 to 1500, and it is the time where in other countries there was the national cultures. In other European countries, national cultures were born. And in Spain, our national culture was born, but it was born under the influence and under the presence of the world of Arabia, the Arab world. And this is something that we have all in mind. Some of us, very consciously, others, they don't realize it, but this is a fact, and this is a fact of life, and we are happy and we are proud to live under this influence, which maybe draw us very much in the culture world. Our most popular dance, flamenco, is obviously an Arab influence, our most popular singing culture, which is again flamenco. You should listen to Muezzin every 3 hours, and it reminds me every 3 hours that my culture comes from this world. Our architecture, our most famous building, civil building in Spain is Alhambra, which is, of course, you have a lot of Alhambras even in the UAE. Our music, our gastronomy, even our arts, dance, everything, it is draws from the Arab world. And in this sense, when someone called Tariq crossed a little strait there between Morocco and Spain, which was not Spain at that time, and he put his foot on a rock, and they called this Gibraltar. From that moment, which was in 700, till now, 2013, I think we are living together with our minds in the Arab world. We have three political axes, always we say, in our foreign policy, which is Europe, which is the air that we breathe. It's our place. We have Latin America. I would say America, for the sake of the U.S. ambassador, in general terms, not only America, North America, but also South America, America in general, and we always say the Mediterranean, and by extension the Arab world. This is our mentality, and this is really our mood before, in the past, and nowadays.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to, well, it's a very good continuation, because we can see that culture and identity is also built on a form of tension between the old and the new, creation and heritage, between the past and the future, how we reinvent ourselves every day and who we think we are. So there's this tension, and you're involved in cultural policy making as a member of the Authority for Arts and Culture in Dubai. So, and we have official culture, which is how, the powers that be define ourselves, and that's often conservative. And then we have the reinvention and basically the counterculture, which is questioning that and often subterranean. So we always have that tension. As a policymaker or someone involved in that, what is it you could actually tell us about cultural identity in that perspective?
If you can allow me, I'm just going to go a little bit over defining something before I get into answering your question. We always, even before we travel anywhere, we like to know where we're traveling, and we like to say hello and thank you in the language of the place we're traveling to. And that's because we want people to identify with us, that we acknowledge their being, that we respect them, that we want to say shukran, salam alaikum, just a basic minimum greeting and pleasantry exchanging when we arrive there. That is very important. I think everybody touched on the fact that language is on the cutting edge here. Language, I think, I'll go back to it, if we learn it from infancy, it is the language of our consciousness. It is the language that we communicate with ourselves, we communicate with our surroundings, and then we communicate with the outer world. We can then, with our ability to create, philosophically even, we see worldview through this language and the way we construct it. Then language is becoming then the cutting edge, and like Dr. Amimi said, we are trying to really rectify it or maintain it in any way that we can by maintaining the idiomatic expressions of it, or poetry, or whatever the creative aspect of it. That is the real aspect of identity for us, at least in this part of the world. But identity have been exteriorized these days, and we moved from being assimilated into one identity. This passport would mean that you carry a passport. It's you identified externally. Therefore, you have to speak a language of this document, or a language of this document and another language. But the language is really the cutting edge, I think, or the real barrier there. The exterior then identity becomes with cars. What car you drive, you identify it by the car. Are you driving a car like mine or a Rolls Royce like?
I'd love to.
Then, where you live is also is a way that you're identified. The level of you live. Do you live in a one-story house or you live in a two-story house? So when you live in a two-story house, you say, I'm going down to see people. You're identifying people as people who are below you, that you come down, you wait downstairs, I'll come and see you. Or I'll go upstairs, you rise. You identify yourself with moving above the ground. Another aspect then also, in the West, maybe people live on this side of the track or the other side of the track. We don't have tracks here. We have tents and we have sand. But the fact that the area where you live, do you live in a shabby area with, then it is by class. It is identified that way. Exterior people can also judge you by the way you wear your clothing. Are you wearing brand names or are you shopping in a supermarket for clothing? All of that had really exteriorized identity. And that's why people always want to know, who are you behind these clothes? Are you worthy of my respect, or are you worthy of, how should I treat you? If you go to any boutique to buy anything, a watch, maybe you could maybe you have 10,000 in your pocket, but the way people treat you is based on their judgment of, are you going to buy, or immediately the salesperson will calculate, and then they'll have this attitude, should I be nice to her? Is she worthy, or he's worthy of buying, or he's just window shopping? So identity is really goes in so many layers in our daily interactions. And of course, unfortunately, in some places, it is by color. And I was shocked in the States when I was called the N-word, because I laughed because that's not me. And I'm like, I'm an Arab, but in the exterior, people don't know that. They know what meets the eye. And that's when I started looking at identity in a serious way. But the most important thing is, if we want, we cannot now, in the challenges of today, keep a language, at least the conscientious language that we have, because I insist on the language because it is the thought that we have in identifying others, in using adjectives that to say, because it is on the basic, it is the language, whether we say it out loud or not. So I'll answer your question now that I relieved myself of this. As policymakers, I think we have priorities here. With all of these challenges, youth have to be amalgamated into one language, and that is the language of respect and harmony, and we need to foster peace. When you do that, you need to let them know what are the bases on which and the principles their ancestors had operated on. So you say for them what is the base background for them to really pivot from and feel comfortable that this is me. I have a solid ground. This is who I am, whether through poetry or dramatic expressions or stories, because until recently we did not record all of the stories that we are rushing to record right now through oral history and other mediums. So unless we have that, we would not really feel comfortable to really challenge or to say, and so therefore we need to first water and irrigate that seed, and once it's up, we don't worry about it. So it is, I think our homework had to do with agriculture, as our late leader, Sheikh Zayed, had been always a person who forced or vouched for keeping this place green in the mind and in the environment too.
Thank you very much. Well, talking about language, as Dr. Bilkhair and Dr. Amimi said, we have the basic tool for identity and how culture sort of manipulates this. However, there are pressures also on identity. And I'd like to come back to a point that you raised, Manish, about filmmaking, but I think that it could extend to other forms of art. But of course, filmmaking is very expensive. And so here we have an object called a film that's supposed to express who you are, what you feel, and basically your outlook on the world and yourself. However, you spoke about the audience, but we also have financiers. We have a highly corporatized environment that have their own sort of perception of what story should be told and how. And I'd like you to develop on that, because in fact it's a very, very modern issue, the market. How does the market shape our culture, and does the resulting culture actually generate sort of a parallel identity generated by Spider-Man and Batman and Star Wars? Or do artists find a way to actually exist within the very powerful constraints on identity that is the market?
I think there's a sort of saying in Hollywood that the only real professionals are the people who market films. And the rest of us, we're all amateurs. We just go in and we do what we do, but they are the people who take whatever rubbish we've produced and make people buy it. And in a way, I suppose the perfect marketing man's film would be a McDonald's hamburger. You know what you're going to get when you pay your £5 or $8, and you know you can buy that McDonald's in London, you can buy that McDonald's in Spain, you can buy that McDonald's here in the Emirates, and it's going to taste exactly the same. The ketchup will be the same. And I think the kind of, the challenge we have as filmmakers is to make sure that occasionally you eat a McDonald's and there's a mango pickle in it, or a falafel or something, And I think you constantly look at this. There is a battle. There's a battle for resources. And I think that the way you win it is to try to find a universal theme in whatever you're working on. If you can imagine, could you imagine, something like Lincoln being made in the way that it is now, 30, 40 years ago? Was anyone ever really going to make the dry, dramatic story of slavery, the emancipation of slavery, basically as a kind of boardroom drama? And if you think about it, but it's such a worthy film. Now, Steven Spielberg probably could have had a go at that straight after Jaws. He made so much money with that, they would have let him make anything. And I think that's one of the challenges we have. You almost write your check for the film that you've made, and then you bounce that check in the film that you're making. That's kind of the algorithm that I think filmmakers use. And I think even if you take something that is, Top Gun is such a great example, I think, of a film. I love sometimes I deal with young film students and show them how to do film structure. And the formula for filmmaking has actually not changed at all in almost 80 years. A bunch of geniuses came out to America from Germany, basically, in the late 30s, and they established a structure which we've all assimilated completely unconsciously. And films, they are interesting. If you take a 120-minute film, just take that structure, in the first 10 minutes, something will happen that will set you on a journey. The end of the first act will be around 30 minutes. So when you think you know what your journey is, something's going to happen, and now your journey is going to be altered. You'll now spend the next 60 minutes going on that journey, fighting little obstacles, and then 30 minutes before the end of the film, bang, something else will happen, and you'll be completely wrong-footed, and you'll be resolving this journey in the last 30 minutes. And Top Gun's a great example. After 10 minutes, there's a great dogfight at the beginning, and at 10 minutes, Maverick's going to flying school, which he didn't think he was going to do. He's a Navy pilot. At 30 minutes, he doesn't win, he loses a dogfight. He loses a dogfight because he cheats, and he learns this big lesson. Now he spends the next 60 minutes trying to be the best fighter pilot at Top Gun. And then at 90 minutes, the big emotional impact happens. He loses his wingman, his best friend dies. And then the last 30 minutes are about his resolution as a human being, about his big inner conflicts. And the big story in Top Gun is actually, it's about a young man who feels inferior to his father, who's always fighting his father. And that's why he flies the way he does fly. That's a trashy Hollywood film, you could argue. It's got absolutely no cultural themes at all. It's all about blowing people out of the sky. But actually, there are really good human themes in that. Very simple themes of friendship. What is a son? Why do we wake up in the morning wanting to be like our dads and be better than our dads? What does that push us to do? And there's a wonderful moment in the film, symbolically. He throws the dog tags of his best friend away. And that's a very, very simple example of letting go. And that way, I think films are fantastic, even if they're trashy, because you can take very deep human emotions, subvert them, make the producers an absolute fortune, but still tell a little story that's very, very personal. I think it's just a great example of it.
Thank you very much. You know what Cocteau said? Somebody asked Cocteau, is there a formula to have success in film? And he says there are rules, absolute definitive rules to filmmaking, and if you respect them, you will have success. They will just have one problem. Nobody knows them. So, Ambassador Salarich, I'd like to come back to you, just to come back to a bit of the, well, breaking news or recent news. But it's very interesting because a lot of challenges are happening in the world, of course. Some of them in the Arab world, as everybody knows, but some of them in Europe, different perhaps. Spain is struggling with the challenges of a crisis, as is most of Europe. And one must wonder how this sort of external sweeping force, again, the market in a way, that imposes itself, thrusts itself in a collective construct. Is this modifying elements of culture and identity in Spain? Is something as surprising and as powerful as those forces going to durably reshape the mindset of Spain or Europe? Or is it just, we just need to sit it out and be who we were?
Yes, I think yes, of course. I think not only Spain or Europe, I think the world has been shaping itself under the forces of crisis. We used to say in the European Union that the European Union has forged its identity after suffering a crisis, either an external crisis or an internal crisis. We have crisis all the time, and we know this word very, very well. We don't know this word of crisis as well as Chinese do, because for the Chinese, crisis means at the same time a problem and an opportunity. It is the same word. I don't know how to say it in Chinese, but it is the same. I know that in Chinese means the same. We don't see it as the same. We don't see crisis as an opportunity. We see crisis as a big problem, huge problem. But of course it's shaping our identity. And I think in moments of crisis, the imagination and the power of creators, of artists, are much more fostered than in times of no crisis. In times of censorship, people that write or people that make movies, they are really putting their imagination further than their censors. And same happens with the times of crisis. Times of crisis, I don't know why exactly, but I think imagination, creativeness, really the genius of the creators really jump ahead. And I think we are going to see something coming up after the crisis. Someone says that the crisis all the crisis starts in September. I don't know why. September we have a big tragedy in New York, which was a political tragedy that started a political really crisis and shaped the 21st century. In September, again in New York, we had a crisis, a financial crisis, and in September also in Spain we had another financial and economic crisis. We are learning now that we have to live with crisis. This crisis is going to last much more time than we think. This crisis is going to really to shape our minds, and we have to live together with the crisis in order to make our world much better. And this is something that the creators and the culture do, and this is something that the politicians should do, which is have a world in which even with less economic means, we have more creativeness. I'm sorry for that word. And then export, and we should export our cultural industry. And this is something that we are, as diplomats, not so fond to do. We are more focused on economics in the pure sense of the word. We would like to promote our economic tissue. We are energetic, energy, telecommunications, infrastructures. But we cannot forget that culture is also an industry. And what we should do is to promote export of our industrial culture. Our industrial culture, is our way of living, is our personality. And this is something that we can promote and we should promote. And all these facts can make our world, of course, look different. Not worse. I don't know if better, but definitely not worse than the world before, than the world of the 20th century. I think there is an opportunity, like the Chinese say, to make a better world after the crisis.
Thank you very much. Well, to wrap things up, I'd like to turn to Dr. Amimi again. It's a good transition again, because we have language, we have a Chinese word which means problem and opportunity in the same time. This is where the language of others can actually teach us quite a few lessons. Just to wrap things up, us as a culture, the Arab world, the Arab language, what is it that you think that we should do, we can do, or we are doing, in order to be outgoing, to actually, well, try and sort of propose our own views on the world through our language, through our cultural exports? Are there, just to wrap things up, those elements of our identity that we offer the world in terms of universality, how should we bring them to the world?
Okay. بالنسبة للأمور التي يجب أن نهتم بها فيما يتعلق باللغة العربية، أعتقد أن اللغة العربية مثل ما ذكرت لها وجودها وتأثيرها في عدد كبير من لغات العالم ولغات العالم الرئيسية. يعني أغلب اللغات اللي يتحدثون فيها من اللغات اللاتينية، الإنجليزية، الفرنسية، الإسبانية، حتى التركية، الفارسية، الهندية، نجد تأثير للغة العربية ووجوده في هذا المجال. أنا أعتقد أننا في حاجة إلى المزيد في الدراسات اللغوية المشتركة بين اللغة العربية واللغات الأجنبية الأخرى التي تأثرت بها اللغة العربية وأثرت فيها اللغة العربية. سأعطي مثالا مهما على أهمية هذا التواصل وتأثيره في نفس الوقت. في القرآن الكريم، يعني حسب ما ذكرته الدراسات القديمة عن القرآن، توجد في القرآن اللي هو أنزل بلغة العرب 50 لغة ولهجة من لهجات العرب وغير العرب. توجد كلمات في القرآن الكريم من لغات غير العرب ومن لهجات العرب من مختلف القبائل والأماكن. وهذا من وجهة نظري كان له تأثير السحر على المتلقي سواء من العرب أو غير العرب. القرآن لا ينتمي إلى قبيلة معينة بحد ذاتها أو مكان معين بحد ذاته، بقراءة أو بعد الإلمام بجميع هذه المفردات. نجد أن هناك كلمات معربة من اللغات الأخرى وموجودة في القرآن، ومن يجد أن في هذا القرآن جزء من هويته ومن لغته، من مفردات لغته، سيجد أن هناك شيء يربطه بهذا الكتاب السماوي. كذلك أي لغة أنا أجد أنها تحمل مفردات من لغتي العربية أشعر بنوع من الألفة، نوع من التقارب مع هذه اللغة، أحب أن أتعرف عليها أكثر، وأعتقد أن العكس صحيح. لذلك نحن أمام فرصة لخلق نوع من التقارب بين مختلف الهويات عبر جعل هذه اللغة ودراساتها رابط بين مختلف الشعوب، مختلف الحضارات، التقارب بينها، نشر السلام. وأعتقد أن اللغة العربية لغة غنية بمفردات السلام أكثر مما هي غنية بمفردات الحرب. أتمنى أن تكون لغتي العربية رسالة محبة وسلام لكل الهويات الأخرى، لكل اللغات الأخرى، هي يعني لغة حب وليست لغة حرب. شكرا جزيلا.
Shukran. Well, before we pass on to Q&A, I'd like to ask our panelists if they have any conclusive remarks, any conclusion. Anyone might want.
I would just say, look at last year's most successful film was The Artist. And I think it's a really, really great case in point for something that you've said and something that we've all been saying. This is a film that is, in theory, made by French people, but there are no words in it. There is no conventional dialogue. This is a film that's in black and white, and this is the film that's full of music and dance. These are all things that are supposed to be out of date, not interesting. There are no explosions in it. There are no violent sex scenes. This is a very, very simple story. But look what they do. They don't take any money up to make the film. I met the filmmakers. They spent nothing on it. They spent their brains on it. They spent all their time trying to be creative. They got some very talented actors who couldn't just act, but who could dance and who could sing. I mean, old-fashioned actors. And they told a story that would work as well in the backwaters of Bhutan as it did in Hollywood. And I think there's a fantastically instructive lesson about the commonality of human beings there. I mean, we're all born. We all grow up with a culture, whatever it is. We go through a phase where we're productive economically. We have children. I mean, who's to say that a child born in America isn't as valuable to the American father as a child born here or in India or in a slum in South Africa? It's a very common human trait. We find love with a bit of luck, and then we have loss, and then we die. And it was a very simple story which covered every one of those points beautifully, inventively, but using a very, very, very international language. And I think for me, it's a paramount film in our modern times for how you can cross cultures using movies.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Of course, this is a very conclusive remark, saying that your conclusion, I simply cannot make. I am a passionate man, but I am not as passionate as my neighbor on the left. And really, I cannot make such a passionate conclusion of art. But I can share the thrust. First of all, that of course the conclusion is that there is no conclusion. Happily for all of us, I mean, we are on our way, and there is a long way in front of us. But of course, I think we have to see all this world in a practical term. I think, of course, theory is good, but I think if we put ourselves into practice, and perhaps I am completely deformed by my profession, and I want to put ideas into practice immediately, perhaps like cinema makers, a little bit the same. We are a little bit also movie makers, but we want to make our ideas, our wishes, reality. And it is not enough to have a desire, to have a wish. You You have to put it into practice. But you have to be careful not to wish something you don't want to, because it will make a reality as well.
Quite true. Thank you very much. Dr. Bilkhair?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that when the Islamic civilization was in Andalusia, 711 until 1492, and when Columbus got lost and found America, he took with him an Arabic speaker because he thought he's going through Bahr al-Dhulumat, which is the sea, which the mystique, nobody knows what's beyond it. And he was definite that people that he will find would be Arabic speakers because the lingua franca was Arabic at that time. So I'll go back to language. But from 711 until 1492, with the fall of Granada, what happened is it was a collaborative work. The whole Arab world is proud, of course, of this achievement. And sorry, Your Excellency, you consider it a colonization. I consider it a collaboration, just to be on a softer, because out of that came really lots of, again, language, translated work from Latin to Arabic. Knowledge was flourishing because people thought about knowledge and they were motivated. It created an environment sustained by knowledge. Everybody was really interested and engaged in this knowledge. Everybody was to be part of that. And many, even women at that time, Walada bint al-Mustakfi was a very well-known lady who had a house and had a saloon, and every night men would come regardless to what people thought of her, but in it, it was the exchange of knowledge and poetry, and people would debate about certain and lots of things. So I think we need to do collaboration, because once we put hands in hand, eye in eye, mind in mind, books will be produced. People will understand that we are one people. And I go back to your question, what is the official? There is no official. I think if you live here one day and breathe the air of the UAE, you know that this place is very special. And no place on earth is like it. It's not because it's my country, but because it is so. And because it is sustained by respect, sustained by peace, sustained by what we have from the leadership down. Nowhere else you see leaders go to pay condolences. I think they need security detail that will take for days. And 3 days are maximum for wakes here. So it's spontaneous. People always respond to the community, and that's what have sustained it. So again, communication, keeping together with the community's need, and also collaborating with them, because that was sustained. If there is an environment, it would have something to sustain it. It have stimuli and response. So it's always, and the tension you mentioned earlier also. Even an arch, to stand as an arch, whether it's an arch of triumph or any arch, even a bow, it would need tension. To reach your target, to do the sign of victory, you would need that tension, you would need that arch. And of course, there's always plan B. Plan B is peace. That we need to block that B and make it peace. So plan B is peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone want to add? Thank you very much. I think we can go to questions now. Have a mic. There you go.
Good evening. I'm going to speak in Arabic because my question is addressed to Dr. Amimi. بدك تطول بالك علي شوي لأنه السؤال شوي طويل. إذا استثنينا الكتاب والشعراء والباحثين باللغة العربية وأخذنا المجتمع العربي ككل، النخبة يعني رجال الأعمال، المثقفين، الفيلم ميكرز بيحكوا لغات مختلفة ولغتهم العربية ضعيفة جدا، وللأسف بعضهم يستعر إذا ما بيعرف يحكي لغة أجنبية، أو بيفتخر إنه ابنه مثلا ما بيعرف يحكي عربي منيح ولكن بيحكي إنجليزي كتير منيح أو فرنساوي أو إسباني. أنا شايف وبخالفك بالرأي إنه هويتنا مهددة لأنه منا كتير فخورين بلغتنا العربية وما عم نجرب نحافظ عليها. ما بعرف بدي أقول كمان كان في نقطة مهمة. هل هو استعمار جديد، الاستعمار الفكري، أو هل هو البوست كولونياليزم اللي كنا عم نحكي عنه مع سعادة السفير؟
اوكي
شكرا.
شكرا. هو سؤال يطرح كثيرا عن أن اللغة العربية مهددة، وأنت تخالفني الرأي وأنا أقول إني بعد أنا أخالفك الرأي. اللغة العربية إذا نظرنا للتاريخ قديم، وليست أولا في بدء الأمر ليست هي لغة حديثة حتى نقول أنها لغة ضعيفة. اللغة العربية لها هذه اللغة التي تركت تأثيرها على اللغات الأخرى، وفي الوقت نفسه موجودة لأكثر من 1500 سنة رغم كل الظروف التي مرت على الدول العربية من هيمنة ووصايات غير عربية عليها ومحاولات من البعض لطمس الهوية العربية واللغة العربية، ولكن لم ينجح أحد في ذلك. ظلت اللغة العربية قوية. أنا عندما أنظر إلى تاريخ المنطقة هنا مثلا في الإمارات، إذا غضينا النظر عن 60 سنة الماضية اللي يمكن نقول أنها ظهرت فيها المدارس النظامية بصورة قوية واضحة، لكن قبل هذا كانوا الناس يعيشون حياة بداوة. كانت اللهجة المحلية هي السائدة ولم تكن العربية الفصحى هي الموجودة، لكن مع دخول المدارس النظامية يعني برزت اللغة العربية بصورة أكبر وظلت موجودة لم تمت. رغم هذا لا تزال المعاملات الرسمية الآن، لا تزال الصحف، لا تزال الوسائل الإعلامية موجودة، يعني اللغة الموجودة فيها اللغة العربية. أنت تحدثت هنا عن بعض الشخصيات أو عن بعض من يفتخر أنه يتحدث لغات غير عربية. هنا نأتي إلى إشكالية أخرى، إشكالية الوعي بأهمية هذه اللغة. من يوجد لديه الوعي بأهمية هذه اللغة يجب أن يكون مفتخرا بها. من يعتقد أنه بمعرفته وإتقانه بلغات أخرى أعتقد أنه يعاني من وجود خلل في فكره وفي وعيه. أنا غير متشائم في هذا الجانب، أنا بالعكس متفائل. عندنا مثلا مسابقة أمير الشعراء التي تنظمها الهيئة، يتقدم إليها سنويا وفي كل موسم آلاف الشعراء من الدول العربية ودول غير عربية، ويعني هناك تمسك قوي من شباب في مقتبل أعمارهم 18 سنة وانت صاعد. يعني هذا يدل على أن مقابل شخص لا يوجد، مقابل شخص لا يفتخر بلغته العربية أو يفتخر بإتقان لغات أخرى، هناك تأكد أن أشخاص كثيرين في مقابله يفتخرون بلغتهم وهويتهم. نحن لسنا ضد تعلم لغات غير عربية، بالعكس أنا أقول أن تعلم اللغات غير العربية مهمة وضرورية مثل اللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن في نفس الوقت يجب أن يفتخر الشخص باللغة العربية وأن يهتم بها ويتعلم، أو على الأقل يكون لديه إدراك ووعي بأهميتها وتاريخها المهمين. شكرا.
Can I say something really quick? I think we're insisting on language as really the tipping point, because it had alienated the older generation from the next generation, and there is no continuity. I think that's why it is an issue in this part of the world. It is because it had abandoned even the terms people use, the old language, and we did not carry it on with us. So there created a gap. That's the only thing, and that's, I think, is why language is becoming. Now, the next generation uses half English, half Arabic, and cannot communicate with their grandmothers at home.
we are talking about culture here from the language perspective as a rams, as an icon of our identity. As we globalize increasingly forward, the language of most of the world is not the language that we speak. It has evolved into a visual, more into a visual, such as the universality of Senna, for example, the movie that talks about the individual, for example, or the artist that was mentioned. Do you see our identity being able to move along with remaining and keeping our roots with our language and our religion and our culture? But do you see us being able, as Arabs, being able to move forward visually and to be able to communicate with the rest of the world through visual means? And thank you.
أنا أعتقد أن اللغة العربية لغة قادرة على احتواء جميع الحضارات الأخرى، وقادرة على أنها تواكب التطور الحضاري في كل جوانب الحياة. إذا كان هناك من عائق يقف أمام احتواء ومسايرة اللغة العربية لهذا التطور، فأعتقد أن العائق هو من داخلنا نحن بأنفسنا. للأسف لا يزال هناك إلى اليوم اختلاف حول نقطة التعريب مثلا، تعريب احتواء المفردات التي جاءت مع التطور الحضاري. لا يزال هناك اختلاف اليوم مع عدم اتفاق على استخدام مصطلحات معينة، وهذه لم تكن موجودة في السابق، لم تكن موجودة قبل 300 أو 400 سنة. كانت الأمور تسير بصورة أكثر سلاسة، كانت اللغة مطوعة أكثر في قبول المفردات الجديدة والطارئة وتعريبها وإخضاعها أيضا لقوانين اللغة العربية وقواعدها. اللغة العربية استطاعت منذ يعني أكثر من 1500 سنة أنها تستوعب لغات حضارات أخرى وأنها تؤثر فيها، وأرى أنها الآن قادرة على أنها تستوعب أيضا المفردات أو جميع أوجه التطور الحضاري دون أن تفقد هويتها. طبعا هذا لا يعني أنها تفقد هويتها وأن تتخلى عن لغتها، ولكن هناك أسس وقواعد للتعريب. ما أجد أن هناك أي إشكالية حالية تتعلق بوجود عائق بين اللغة ومواكبة التطور الحضاري في العالم ككل. إذا كان هناك من عائق فأعتقد أنه سيكون من داخلنا نحن.
ألا تظن سيادتك أن التقدم العلمي والثقافي والإبداعي في أمة من الأمم أو شعب من الشعوب هو السبب في انتشار هذه اللغة وهيمنتها على الثقافة العالمية؟ يعني مثلا الآن اللغة الإنجليزية هي تقريبا لغة الحضارة بالعالم ولغة الثقافة، فأكثر الناس بيتعلموا اللغة الإنجليزية وتؤثر وتدخل في اللغات الأخرى. وكانت الأمة العربية في تقدم ومسيطرة على الثقافة العالمية، فدخلت الكلمات العربية باللغات جميعها. مثلا كما تفضل سيادة السفير أنه اللغة الإسبانية متأثرة باللغة العربية بأكثر من 30%. أيضا اللي بيدرس بالعلوم القديمة بوجد أنه مثلا بعلم الفلك أن الكلمات الأجنبية للأسماء اللي كتبوها العرب نفسها ما تغيرت. مثلا مجموعة الثريا الآن بالإنجليزي الثريا، مجموعة الكرسي باللغة العربية وبالإنجليزية، مجموعة الدب الأكبر، الدب الأصغر، كل هذه الكلمات نفسها وكانت الثقافة العربية هي المسيطرة وهي في تقدم علمي وثقافي سيطرت على اللغات العالمية. أما الآن كما ترون أن الوضع غير أصبح أول، فالسيطرة الآن للغات الأخرى، لغات الحضارة والثقافة والتقدم. شكرا.
أن يكون للتطور الحضاري أو التقدم في مختلف جوانب الحياة تأثيره أيضا من حيث اللغة على اللغات الأخرى.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Mustafa Karguti. My question really is concerning the future, not the present, because we can go on talking about that, I think, forever. Yes, I think we will see in the next few years a James Bond from Bombay. I disagree with you. 2009, we saw a black man going into the White House, elected and re-elected. So Spain has got out quite well after so many years of Arab domination. They've done extremely well. They have their own identity and all that. With this fast-changing world in which we are living at the moment, I asked the panel what sort of identity you can envisage for the humankind, let's say in 100 years. What identity we would have.
I've got a friend who's a music producer, and he gave me an answer to a question which could slightly illuminate that. He produces music really for the internet now. A lot of the music that we now hear no longer has a man playing a violin or a cello. I mean, people sit down with sampled pieces of music and create music. And he said that he stumbled upon a talent. There are two kids, they're 18 and 19 years old. And they're in the Midwest of the United States, and he said they are the most knowledgeable people about basically English rock and roll in the 60s that he has ever met. And we're talking about music that was recorded and burned onto old-fashioned records, not digital music at all. And we're not talking about children who know what rank a record was. They know every chord, they know every beat, they know every time signature. And what these kids are doing, because their influence is hip-hop, their influence is trance music, their influence is music that's 20 years younger than me. They're creating music using those 60s chords, those structures, and those songs, and they are making music, which he says is going to blow the world away. And I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen in the future, because I think what your culture does is it grounds you, but in the same way that roots should ground you. But the whole point is that we're meant to be trees, we're not meant to be roots. And I think these two kids are a fantastic example of that. They are going to become the most extraordinary trees because the internet has just meant that they can get any data they want, they can download anything. They've never even been to England, and they know more about the Beatles probably than anyone other than George Martin. So my answer is just, it's a very optimistic one. I think, you know, creativity is positive. I mean, it really has that angle.
Just to build on music and on this sort of answering your question and bring things a bit closer to home. I mean, I'm feeding into what you just said. We're working with someone, he's a musician, he's an incredible player of the oud. Then he went on to playing the electric oud. And then you meet him, and he basically takes all the traditional musical language of the Arab world. He's very much interested now. I mean, he changes all the time. He's always very... And this is someone who really achieved as much as you can achieve in the world of music. I mean, he played with Paul McCartney, Brian Eno, I mean, you name it. Zaha Hadid, I think, says of him that he's the soundtrack to her architecture. So he's an incredible musician. And one thing where you see that we have all this heritage that can be geared towards the future is when you see him, first of all, play the classical oud and play Hausi Andalus music, which is very rooted, very traditional, very west of Algeria, Moroccan. And then he plays his electric oud, and it's hard rock. It's the same music. He's just plugging it into the future. And he's drawing lines where he's connecting who we are to who we will be. And he's connecting people who are not us to us. And of course, the internet helps that as a tool. What I'm saying is that nobody can really, and that's what the fun part, nobody can say what that collective construct is going to be. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be dangerous because you ruffle feathers. when you do that. So it's going to be, and there's going to be that zone, and that's very interesting to me, of discomfort, where we're going to challenge our parents, respectfully, I hope, but it needs to be done. And as a matter of fact, by doing it, we're probably going to push what they created further, saying, you know, well, we're challenging it, but we're bringing it to the future. So in fact, we're making it immortal. So it's a very, very complex process. And I think as an Arab, I really want to see this happen into the Arab world. This is going to plug our identity into the world. This is what I think. I might be wrong, I might be right. But that's what I see happening. And this is how I see us plugging into the rest of the world.
Very interesting. If I may add, when they invented Barbie and they wanted to market it to Japan, the Japanese did not get the idea of how to play with Barbies, so they created a video to teach kids how to play with Barbie. So you look at this VHS video, and then they just slowly you undress her, you comb her hair, and that's what's happening now. Creativity, I think, is really threatened. We have this Got Talent, American Idol. They entice you by the enterprise, not by the motivation, not through what you have to take out of yourself as a creative person. If you train your voice to sing this song really and be Whitney Houston that night, you could win that prize, and you could sing with so-and-so tomorrow, and you're going to have your own poster. The rich and famous lifestyle is enticing youth these days, motivating them to be creative. And that's a shallow way of being creative. I don't think it is self-driven. And it's exactly like Barbie. Yeah. You are taught how to play with it because there is a marketing thing behind it.
I think Spinoza said, superstition is the confusion between cause and consequence. And we're in a very superstitious world right now, in the sense that we think, oh, if I'm just as famous as Paul McCartney, I'll probably be as talented as him, whereas it's sort of the opposite. Achieve something and you'll be famous. And one of the interesting things, just to follow, it's very, to me it's fascinating how art is basically a core that's within yourself and you build on it, and then it goes to the world. And right now we've built shells from what people want, and we expect them miraculously to sort of fill. They're just compact shells. One of the interesting things is music, of course. We've seen over the past 10 to 20 years these powerful, powerful voices, perfect, you know, in the sense that they just put a note just right where it needs to be. And it doesn't have the least soul. And there's an expression in music in French, I don't know, it's when a voice is what they call blue. It's just this little part of imperfection. And when you look at the great performances, be it of opera, rock and roll, whatever, you always have that frailty, this danger, this risk, this just pushing the note, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when it doesn't, often it's done by a great performer who just took that risk for the audience, and the audience is just grateful for it. Whereas you have those empty shells who just do this powerful, you know, Céline Dion, nightmare, in the sense that it's just, you know, it's very powerful, very precise, no soul. And I think that's very, very telling of where pseudo-culture is going, and basically creating those empty shells, and where we should be going. I mean, when I say we, I mean not only our part of the world, but all people who want to actually sort of connect to something that is real. And the risk that you're talking about, I mean, it's spot on. To me, it's the devil, really. So,
I'll add to His Excellency's point about crisis or opportunity. I think this is the right environment because it is crisis, and we will hopefully, even decision makers, who I'm not one of them, but I try to impact youth in any way that we can to really make a difference in that little bit. Because I remember even from my days, and I was born in 1959. It's those years, the young boys used to hang on the side of a neighborhood, and they would drum, or when they go in the Eid for a holiday, they will drum or play al-oud. This is them coming out. This is them expressing themselves. We don't see that anymore. We see them maybe if they're not involved in clubs playing sports. We see them on the shops sitting, in cafes. This is time wasted because that's a talent. It's going through, you becoming passive, you're just receiving through people sending you something and you forwarding. You become a service to Salat and other companies. But you really, a forward service, you see something, you do something. As if you are responsible, you see something, you do something on that thing. So you're responsible of spreading the same, so nobody's smarter than you. You have to maintain the status quo in that regard. But I would like them to come back and get out of this box and really start challenging themselves as youth. Learn how to play l'oud, learn how to drum, learn to, whatever it is, because art is really, it's like money. It is, people don't look at you, they look at their interest in it. If they take part of it as team members and you're a band, that's how it is activated. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I found it very interesting because one of the things that just worried me about some of the comments on identity and culture, I think you hit the point with the Spinoza quote about cause or consequence. I think a lot of us go in exactly the wrong direction, in as much as so many things in life, almost everything is oblique. You don't make great films because you're trying to be famous or rich. You make great films, both of you, because there's something you truly believe. It's a great story that needs to be told, and there's something you want to communicate. And isn't it perhaps also true, this whole worry about culture, that if one's worried about spreading one's culture or, one's identity, it's because one's actually worrying about that instead of actually what do you contribute and what is it your culture can contribute. And if we do that, maybe it will actually spread, rather than if we try to spread it, it then simply becomes a form of nationalism, which is destructive all round.
There's a gentleman. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm a student of diplomacy and international affairs, and my question is about cultural identity and its relationship between cultural identity and peace and conflict. And it goes, in line with the last question. It's about, it's to His Excellency, the Spanish ambassador. It's about how far you want to go with or any culture should go with, being proud with its cultural identity and doing things to promote its cultural identity. And where does the line, where should be the line drawn? And because the way I see it in many Arab countries, because in the last 100 years, you had a growing Arab nationalism movement. This has, it's because, of decolonization and, the other things, and also to show resistance to Ottoman Empire culture, blah, blah, blah. But it has also created problems. In many Arab countries, you have ethnic minorities. And some of them have other languages other than Arabic language. And if you look at the map of the Arab world today, you have conflicts in some countries. You have conflict in Algeria, you have conflict in Sudan, and in Iraq. You have conflict, of course, in Lebanon. And some of these conflicts between minorities and between the Arab majority population is related to cultural identity, related to language. Not completely rooted in the difference of the language or ethnicity, but it's also related to that. And what fuels that conflict sometimes is the pride in the Arab culture, pride in the Arab roots and the Arabic language. My question goes to the Spanish, His Excellency, the Spanish ambassador, about how do you reflect on this comment with regard to Spain and the conflict inside Spain between the Spanish people and the Basque and Catalonians regarding cultural identity, and what do you think should be done in Spain to create peace between these groups using cultural identity?
Well, thank you. I think it's very, very interesting and very exciting, your question. First of all, I think that we are all legitimate to promote our cultures, and we are not legitimized to impose our cultures. I think nobody now is legitimized to impose anything in anybody. I think we should promote peacefully and using all our intellectual and our political, economic, whatever means, really to promote your identity and your culture. And I think this is something which is really in our minds, but not only in the minds of diplomats or in the minds of politicians, it's in the minds of everybody, on artists, on economists or businessmen. They are trying to promote their own views and to promote their own views of the world. On the second part of your question, well, it is more interesting. I have to deny we say in Spain, when you play cards, you deny the first mood, no? There is no conflict. I have to deny that there is a conflict in Spain between regions. Of course, there is a discussion, a political discussion, whether some regions are going through separatism or no separatism, but really there is no conflict. This is no, of course, no, but not even a psychological conflict. It is if you want, a democratic discussion, and this is being made by democratic means. Of course, some of us have an opinion, others have another opinion, but it is made in a democratic, whether you are in agreement or not in agreement, this is another thing. But I don't think it's a cultural, let us say, cultural opposition or cultural situation. It is a political situation. Nobody, I don't think we are not in a position, anybody in Spain, to impose culture or to impose anything, not even on ourselves, not to say on others, no? And this is something that we have learned during the past, and now that I think the word also colonization is been repeated here in some of the questions. We are proud of the Arab colonization, you know. First of all, we are proud to have the Guinness record on the longest colonization in the history, which is 800 years. You can think of other colonizations, and you will see that they are far more shorter. And we are proud of that. Even, you know, in Spain, colonia is used for perfume, which is a very nice. It is not a negative word. It is a very positive word. Perfume, something that smells well. Thank you.
Thanks for diplomacy. You know, that's a very diplomatic answer.
Distinction. There's a distinction between culture and politics. And I think that's getting to the heart of what you're talking about, what we're talking about. It is mixed, but there is a distinction, though. There is a distinction. There is culture and there's politics. To say that 100% of any kind of group, even if you could define whatever its culture is, has a particular politics, it just must be mistaken.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, we saw culture impacting identity in a lot of countries around the world. In North America, you know, Woody Guthrie and Smithsonian Institute helped bring up folk music. Bob Dylan popularized it, became rock and roll music, etc. In South America, we saw Violeta Parra did something similar. Julio Cortázar and Borges and literature sort of looked at identity in the boom era of literature in South America at that time. In Europe with Kanoo, the same thing with identity. So my question is, where do you see the UAE with the confluence of all these different cultures and what we've been talking about all night? Where do you see the UAE going from an artistic point of view in changing Emirati identity? Thank you. Or keeping it the same.
هنا أعتقد أن نحن ممكن نتحدث من جانبين. الجانب الأول جانب الاهتمام بالثقافة والهوية المحلية والثقافة المحلية الإماراتية. هناك خطط واضحة تم وضعها منذ سنوات عبر مختلف المؤسسات الثقافية في الإمارات. سأتحدث عن جانب من تجربة هيئة أبو ظبي للثقافة والتراث واهتمامها بالثقافة المحلية من خلال إقامة مسابقات ومهرجانات وبرامج تلفزيونية وإعلامية وإصدار مؤلفات تتعلق بالهوية المحلية والتعريف بها للجيل الجديد والتحفيز على التمسك بها في إطار عصري تكنولوجي حديث، وكانت النتائج جدا مفرحة. هناك إقبال كبير من الجيل الشاب الناشئ بالأنشطة والمهرجانات والفعاليات المتعلقة والمرتبطة بالهوية والثقافة المحلية وتمسك شديد بها، يعني رغم أي عوامل أخرى ممكن نقول أنها قد تكون لها تأثير غير أو ليس في صالح الهوية، لكن الحمد لله نتائج جدا مشجعة، مما يعني أن هناك يعني صورة واضحة لكيفية التعامل مع هذه المسألة وهذه القضية، وهناك أيضا خطط مستقبلية مستمرة للمحافظة على هذه الهوية وفي نفس الوقت عدم رفض الآخر. وهناك انفتاح، الانفتاح هذا ليس بإرادتنا طبعا مع في ظل تطور التكنولوجيا عبر مختلف الوسائل. من المهم أن نتقبل هذا الانفتاح، ومن المهم أيضا أن نعرف كيف نتعامل معه وكيف نحدد ونوجد هويتنا وذاتنا في ظل هذا الانفتاح على مختلف ثقافات العالم. هذا فيما يتعلق بالهوية المحلية. فيما يتعلق بالهويات الأخرى أعتقد أن إجابتي السابقة ترتبط أو تجيب على جزء من هذا. هناك أيضا اهتمام بالثقافات الأخرى، هناك أيام وأسابيع تقام لأنشطة وفنون الدول الأخرى للتعريف بها، وأعتقد أن هذا أيضا يظهر مدى الوعي الموجود عند المسؤولين وعند القيادة الإماراتية بالاهتمام بالآخر أيضا والاستفادة من تجربته والتعرف على هويته وعلى تجربته، وهذا كله أيضا في سبيل صون الهوية المحلية والثقافة المحلية.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're done with time, so sorry to cut an interesting conversation. Thank you very much for attending. I'd like to thank the Abu Dhabi Festival for organizing this, and NYU, of course, for having us, and our panelists for raising all those interesting points. And see you soon.